we're in and somebody recorded it for me. Thank you. We're now at the end of March, the beginning of April. And oh my gosh, what a beautiful day. Oh, today was a gift to the people and a gift to the bees. It was just such a gorgeous day. So I hope that you guys are seeing bees flying or looking forward to having your bees flying. We have Tracy here with us today, who's going to go ahead and give us our beginner lesson for the next half hour. And I'm sure she's got lots of things to talk about because spring is here. Go ahead, Tracy.
Spring is here. Good evening, everyone. And I'm bummed out. I was actually planning to go to the meeting live, but you can probably hear from my voice that that'd not be a good idea. So if I cough in the middle, I'll turn myself on mute, but I did bring something nasty back from Florida last week, so I apologize. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Maybe. Come on. There we go. Don, can you see that?
We can see it.
Awesome. Well, so spring is here. And so on the left-hand side of that picture is the picture of the dandelions in my side yard that I took today with a lovely mason bee out foraging for pollen. Not only are the honeybees out, but the mason bees are starting to emerge as well. And everybody's bringing back that bright orange pollen from the dandelions, which are a great source for early pollen for the bees all around. So for those of you that have bees already and overwintered them, a big kudos to you. Just a few tips for you guys up front, and then we'll have some installation tips for those of you that are getting bees. So inspecting your hives now is a great opportunity. We've got some warm days coming up and some cold days coming up, usually back to back. So my humble advice is when you're starting early in the spring like this to go ahead and make sure you have a plan, because you don't want the hive open too long because they've got that precious brood in there that they need to have nice and toasty and warm. And each time we go in there and rip the lid off, all the heat goes running out the top. So just be cognizant of that and bring all your tools and notebook, or however you're going to record your inspection, have all that ready. Have any extra woodenware ready ahead of time, and only pull those frames out and move them around if it's 55 or so degrees outside. And there are some days coming up when that's going to work. So obviously you want to work your hives from the back or the side so you don't block that entrance. And if you can, avoid opening them while it's rainy or windy. Good luck in the spring sometimes around here, but do your best. All right, and so here's the forecast coming up. You'll see that the weekend's looking pretty snazzy, and next week as well. So if you don't already have them on, now is a great time to add pollen patties to your colonies, because we do have a bunch of rainy, long stretches of weather that always occurs in April, and the bees run out. So they will cannibalize existing brood if they run out of pollen during those rainy, cold days. So you don't want that to happen. So go ahead and invest in some summer patties and put one of those on top. And now is about the time to start adding 1-to-1 sugar syrup if they're low on stores. If they don't have any honey left from the winter, then 1-to-1 syrup is appropriate now, because the average daily temps are up around 55 degrees. And then the same thing with the brood. They need sugar and they need pollen in order to feed those. And plus, those of you that don't have wax, the super important to feed 1-to-1 syrup continuously so that they'll start building that wax in these warm, sunny days. And then optional supplements. I include 1 or 2 tablespoons of white vinegar in my syrup. And then I squirt in a little bit of lemon juice, approximately 1 tablespoon per gallon. And then what's more important for measurements is if you're using any essential oils or manufacturer supplied supplements, make sure you read the label on that and don't add more than what they suggest, because the bees won't take it. And importantly, for those of you that are new, don't feed your bees any honey from the store or from unknown sources, because it could have foul brood spores in there, and that'd be terrible. And then obviously for those people that have been around, but not so much for folks that are new, is not to feed your bees brown sugar or molasses, or, like brown sugar, or natural sugar, I meant, because that has too much fiber in it, and it could give them dysentery. All right, and then I'm just going to go into installing packages of bees, and then we can do questions at the end. So for those of you that have bees now and have questions, hold those questions, and then we'll have time at the end. So those of you that are installing a package of bees, here's the time to perk up, because you'll probably get your package right around the time that, or maybe even before the next beekeeping meeting. So it's important to make sure that you take good notes at this part. And then there's some great YouTube videos too that you can watch. So what I recommend is you set your boxes up ahead of time. Have your hive stand, bottom board, and one deep, or the two mediums if you're using medium boxes. Go ahead and suit up. What I don't have in here is light up your smoker. I light my smoker and just have it running in the background. You don't want to smoke the bees in the cage itself, because they're just really getting used to their queen, and the pheromones are just right. And so you don't want to mess it up with a bunch of smoke. So just have your smoker running in the background in case they start buzzing you, and then you can smoke yourself, but don't smoke the cage of bees. You obviously want to suit up. And then what you do is you gently tip that box so over the top of your hive body so that the can slides out. If you try to leverage it out in some of the videos, it's super hard, but it's a whole lot easier if you just tip it sideways and just gently pull it out, because there's going to be a bunch of bees that are attached to it, and a lot will fall down in the box as soon as you move that can out. And then, as you see in the picture on the top, I just set the can next to the bees. And then you gently remove the queen cage out. Take a look to make sure your queen's alive. If she's not, it happens sometimes. Just get a hold of the person that you purchased the package from, and they'll replace her. And then there is a cork in the end of that cage. And so what you want to do is you want to use your hive tool in the corner and pull that little cork plug out, stick your finger over the end really quickly, and then you smash a little mini marshmallow or two in the bottom. And then you hang the queen cage in between the center frames. You want to make sure that that mesh that you see the queen there is facing to the opening, so that you don't smother her and the bees can get to her and feed her. And then what I do is then I just use a piece of tape or a thumbtack, and there's a little hanger on there, and I just thumbtack that right to the frame, and then I move them together as closely as I can get them. Move this little window out of my way. Sorry about that. So then what you do then is you gently dump the rest of the bees into the box, and you don't have to dump all of them, but give it a good shake, and most of them will fall down in there. These two colonies were installed one right after the other. You'll see on the one on the right hand side here, there looks like there's fewer bees, but they're not. They just are down in between the frames now, whereas this one in the middle was just installed, and there's a big pile on the top. So it takes them 3 or 4 minutes to go down inside like that, and then you're good to go. Once you're done, then what I do is I set the cage near the entrance. If you can, lean the cage up against the entrance, because some of those bees have never been outside. They're just young nurse bees, and they need to crawl up in there. So not the ideal photo that I have, but it was the best I had at the time. So if you can, get the boxes up a little bit closer so that they can walk right into the entrance. So once you have the bees in, then you have the inner cover goes right on top of it. Actually, back up a minute. So you put a little pollen patty on top. You just don't want the pollen patty over the top of the middle where the queen is. You want it off to the side. And then you put your inner cover on top. And then I use top feeders. So these top boxes are covering a top feeder. These two are empty medium boxes, and then I didn't have another medium box, so I used a deep box that didn't have any frames in it. So they're covering the syrup feeder on top there. And then you want to, once you get this all set up like this, you want to leave them for a good week. Make sure that you continually, and I have continually underlined for a reason, they need a lot of syrup in order to make all the wax, especially if you're starting from just plain foundation frames with wax covered foundation. So you really need to keep up the syrup, and it's amazing how much wax they'll draw, but only if you keep the syrup on there. So even if you have to go and look on the top and fill it up every couple days, I would highly recommend that, because like I said, the rainy days in between, they'll use a lot of that syrup up, and then once they run out, they'll slow down on their wax production, and you don't want that. So after a week, you want to open it up to make sure that the queen has been released. If not, you can remove the remaining candy plug and let her go. Once there's 7 or 8 frames drawn out, then you can add your next brood box on top of that. And again, continually feed. I also have a reference at the end about a great video to watch if you've never done a hive inspection by a master beekeeper in the Midwest. So stay tuned for that. And then if you're purchasing a nuke, now's the time for you guys to perk up and really take a listen. Installing a nuke is way easier, by the way, than installing a package. So you just place the nuke on top of your colony. If you get home and it's raining outside, you just set it on top of where they're going to be, open the door and walk away. And even if it's a couple of days of rain, then I recommend you just go ahead and leave them in that nuke for a couple of days, right on top of the box, so that they can orient and come and go from the nuke box. And as soon as the weather breaks and you've got a sunny patch or a warmish afternoon, go ahead and install them then. So you don't want to leave them in the nuke box for too long, because they can create some queen cells and think that they're too crowded and swarm. In fact, some of the nukes that come up from California get a little overcrowded and end up with queen cells. So it's important to make sure that you remove any queen cells that are in your nuke if you have a live queen in there. So what you want to do, you do want to lightly smoke your nuke because they're used to the queen. And then you gently remove one of the outside frames. And if I get this to move, so you want to install the nuke frames in the same order they came out of the smaller box in. If you have a frame that has all honey or pollen on it, you can go ahead and put it on that very far edge of the box, like I have in this example. If it has any brood at all on it, you want to make sure it's in the middle together with the other frames that have brood. If you don't, then the brood that's out here will most likely die. So you want to make sure and keep all the brood together. Make sure you have a queen that's in there. You should have all stages of larvae. You should have capped brood. You should have little tiny eggs right on up to the brood that they're just capping. So it should be really a complete colony, just in a mini size. And then if for some reason you don't have a queen, it is rare, but call your supplier to request a new one if there really isn't a queen in there. And then you want to fill all the empty spaces with undrawn for your new frames. If you've got drawn wax, even better. But in this instance, these are 5 brand new frames and 5 nuke frames. And then you want to make sure and push all of the frames together in the middle so they don't build weird comb in between. Place a pollen patty on top, just like the folks that have packaged. Feed 1 syrup. Excuse me. And continuously feed those girls. Come on. And then you want to place the nuke box near the new hive, just like you did the package box, so that the remainder of the bees can crawl or fly up in there. You want to inspect after a week as well. And then, as promised, here's the YouTube link for Dave Burns's colony inspection. He's a master beekeeper in the Midwest, and the video is excellent. He also has some other excellent educational resources on his website, so check that out. If you have extra time on your hands, Bee Culture magazine is a really good layperson's magazine. And if you're really into scientific journals, the American Bee Journal is the magazine for you. And you can get both of those either online or in paper format still. And I have my 4 favorite books listed here below if you want a great reference book for new beekeepers. Keeping Honeybees, Stories Guide to Keeping Honeybees, and the Beekeeper's Handbook are both excellent. If you're an intermediate or advanced beekeeper, Dadant has the Bible of all beekeeping. It's a thick tome, The Hive and the Honeybee. There are lots of editions available on Amazon for cheap. Don't get them. Get the 2015 version, which is the latest one. And then for those of you that are into planting bee-friendly gardens, Doug Purdy's book is excellent as well. All right, and with that, I'll stop sharing and see if we have questions.
Looks like Tara Lee has a question.
Yeah, I have a question. My hive died this winter, so I haven't done an inspection yet to look at the frames, but I know I have a lot of honey, and I believe I also have probably some brood caps that probably died. Do I clean out? I don't want to destroy any of their wax that they have built up. How do I handle and I have a nuke that I'm going to be installing for here and when I get the nuke to pick up. So how should I handle what my old hive and what's in there and when installing a nuke?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I usually do on a dead out like that is I pull all the frames out and I just make sure and brush off all the dead bees. And then I clean off my bottom board because there'll be a whole bunch of dead bees down there too. And then I would take out 5 frames that don't have anything on them or that's just drawn wax and store those, and then install your 5 new nuke frames in the middle of a deep box. And then as they build out, once they get to 7 or 8 frames that have bees on them and they're actively working those frames, you can add an extra box. And then you just got 5 extra frames that way. And then what I do too is I rotate out the old wax, but you don't have to worry about if it's moldy or anything. They'll clean it all up and make it look pretty.
And if I have frames that have a tremendous amount of honey already on them, is that considered, built out and go ahead and add the second deep?
I would go ahead and wait because the spring is pretty cold. We have some really cold nights, and so I just make sure that the bees are covering 7 or 8 frames. So you'll be able to add your next box quicker than if you were starting with a package. But I'd go ahead and keep that space confined until they get more bees in that box, and then add another one probably in a couple of weeks.
That makes sense. Thank you very much.
You bet. Kathy.
I just wanted to say that normally I don't put more than 1 really dirty frame in each box, because then the bees are spending all their time cleaning out a frame and they're not foraging and taking care of the babies as much as they should be. So I try to limit how much crappy looking stuff I give back to them. And if you haven't gone into your hive, it's died and it's been sitting there, more than likely you're going to have a lot of mold in there on top of places where there has been pollen, or even on top of some places that have had nectar in them. And you can take those frames as long as they're dark. If they're brand new comb, you can't do this, but as long as they've got some propolis into them and they're sturdy, you can take them outside, take your hose and gently hose them out, shake the water out, turn it over, do it to the other side, shake the water out, and then leave it for a day for the sun to just dry it all up, and then give it back to the bees. And it really saves you a lot of time and saves the bees a lot of time, so they can be doing their bee thing and not house cleaning.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Kathy.
You bet.
Thank you.
The other thing that's good for mold is a dilute hydrogen peroxide, 25% hydrogen peroxide, 75% water. And if you squirt that on there, it kills the mold, but it breaks down into a product that's really, really safe for the bees. The vets use it a lot for disinfecting for animals, and it's also very safe for bees. We had a vet in the area who was also a beekeeper, so she was always always giving advice, and that helps. So it's a good way to kind of make sure that the mold spores are really taken care of.
Bill.
Yes, I have a question regarding swarming. Do the bees that go out and find a place for the swarm, their new home, does that happen before the hive swarms? Or does the hive swarm and then the scouts go out and look for a place to go? Or does it happen at the same time?
My humble opinion is that it all kind of happens at the same time, that the scout bees are out looking ahead of time. And then, they might land on a tree because the queen's fat and out of shape. And they might have a good idea where they're going, or the scout bees might not agree on where they're going. And so they get partway out and then they land, and then it's actually a democratic decision where the scout bees come back and do waggle dances on the outside of the swarm cluster. And then once they come to a decision, they'll fly off to their new home or towards a new home until the queen gets tired again and lands maybe somewhere else. So I've heard that some of the colonies that people have are booming with bees right now, and that Kit at least has some queen cups that have turned into queen cells this last week and have eggs in them. So the bees, if you've got a big booming colony, may be thinking about swarming already. The trouble is that we don't have warm enough weather to get good mating flights for queens, and not very many drones yet. So I don't know. It'll be an interesting spring.
Yeah, I was just asked the question because I'm wondering if I put out swarm traps, if in inciting them to swarm, like they
No.
go. No.
No, they're gonna swarm or not based on the dynamics inside the colony, not whether there's a swarm box nearby.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mhm.
And a really good book to read is Tom Seeley's Honeybee Democracy. It is written in layman's language. It reads like a novel. It's so interesting. And it really helps you to understand how bees communicate and how they go about choosing a new home when they swarm. So Honeybee Democracy is a fantastic read. And another thing to consider, we're having such a early spring compared to what we've had for the last 3 years. If you have overwintered bees and they're a really, really strong colony, and you don't want more bees, you just want the same number of hives that you have right now, be very judicious in how much syrup you give them, because the syrup is going to stimulate them to grow and lay more eggs and more likely swarm on you. If that's good, if that's what you want, if you want to make splits and have more bees, then feed them, go ahead and feed them lots of syrup. But if they have plenty of food already and you have as many bees as you want, then I would be very judicious with the syrup and just make sure they have enough so that they're not starving during the rainy days that Tracy was talking about.
Questions, everyone?
Okay, so if there's no more questions, then let's go ahead and move into the business portion a few minutes early. What that will do is give us a few more minutes to kind of do a bee chat, because what we like to do is after the business portion, then we have ideally about 15 minutes of time when folks can just kind of ask questions free form, both in the room and on Zoom. So let's, and I love that people are asking questions in chat. For those of you who are live in the meeting, if you can feel free to log into the meeting through your phone, through Zoom also, and kind of watch the chat that's going on, and you can ask questions also through chat. So it's a really, really nice new technology feature. So welcome to spring. I'm just going to cover a few business things. We are so thrilled that it's spring and we're so happy that the bees are coming and we're so happy that you're here and that you're members of PSBA. This is the best thing you can do for your bees, and learning how to keep bees is to join your local club. So you're in the right spot, and we're going to do a lot of fun things this year to help you learn how to have fun with your bees and keep them alive. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to have our second apiary day this coming Saturday. It was last Saturday, it was 51 degrees and raining. It's just not good weather for getting into the hives. And this Saturday is going to be beautiful. So we're going to head out to the apiary Saturday from 11 to 1. And we're going to learn about putting syrup on. We're going to talk about spring treatments. We're going to do an assessment of hive health. So we're going to do lots of fun spring things, and it's a great time to come and ask questions and meet other beekeepers. And then our next apiary day will be the following Saturday on April 6th. So we've got 2 of them coming up back to back in the next 2 weeks. And then I'm going to, on the next subject is, if Bruce is there, I'd like to give Bruce an option to talk a little bit about the auction items that are in the room, but I want to give you a little heads up that that's coming instead of just springing it on you. So I'm going to go to the next subject, and then if Bruce is there, then he can talk about what's available in the room. And so next month, I'll be coming in and actually doing the speaker presentation next month. And since I'll be talking for more than like 15 minutes, I'll do the drive-in. It's an hour-and-a-half drive from my home to the club, to the meeting. So I'm going to do that next month. And I have a topic that I'm really excited to share with you guys on fat bodies and bee lifespan. This is a topic that I developed for my Cornell master program and gave at the WASBA conference last October, and it's just a fun one. I'm really excited to share it with you. There's a lot of good information. With that, is Bruce there? Do you want to talk about the auction items, Bruce?
He is here and he's standing by.
Okay, good.
I am here.
Okay,
And
good.
what I want to sort of introduce, first of all, my name's Bruce, I'm the treasurer. And I do some of the weird things that are not really related to being treasurer. But this is peripherally related. We've got a bunch of things here that we're going to be auctioning off in a silent auction. So there's 0 minimum bid. So if you see something there that you like, you put your name on it. And if someone else has their name on it, you have to bid like something more, right? It's a simple thing, but we're moving some excess equipment along, some things that have been donated to the club, and we just don't need them, and we want to put them into good hands. Probably the most exciting single item is in the corner, which is a 4-frame hand crank extractor. It's all stainless steel inside, and it's one of them that we have used as a rental for many years. We just don't need it right now. And so if you like to take it home, put your name on it. If someone else has put your name on it and you want to pay $1, put $1 and put your name on it, because there's no, the first person gets it for nothing. After that, you have to bid it up a little bit. And the other thing is I gave out everybody who was here got a ticket, and we have a drawing here in a couple minutes. Dagon, it's a company that manufactures beekeeping equipment and publishes the American Bee Journal, has donated a couple of things for us for a drawing. And one of them is a 6-month subscription to the American Bee Journal. And the other item is a J-hook, which do I have in my hand? No, I don't. But it's a hive tool. It's a handy thing. If you don't have one, it'd be a good thing to have. You have one already. Having 2 sometimes is convenient. Anyway, Dagon also sent us a huge pile of this month's American Bee Journal and a whole bunch of catalogs. And so those are the things that we've got. The table closest to the extractor, everything on that is free. So there's some caps there, different sizes, a couple of other kind of goofball tools. There's a bee, that was missing an eye, we discovered. You know, if it's something that you can be used for demonstration purposes or if it's for fun, go ahead and grab that. There's some bags there to pick up the lids. Just grab the lids that you might need. There are standard mason jar lids, wide mouth mason jar lids, and a smaller plastic lid that I think fits a size of queen line jug. So anyway, that's the story. I don't know if I need to add any more. Everybody knows how a silent auction works at home, right? If not, ask someone to help. Thanks.
A quick question.
Oh, yes.
For the auction, will we be able to like Venmo or write a check or something?
You can pay me by PayPal or by check. Last time we had someone who took something else. But there are a couple of options. Cash or check is the easiest to handle. But we can do PayPal, and if we can figure out, which we couldn't last time, how to make a credit card reader work, which, as I say, didn't work last time. I don't know why, but maybe with Nancy's help we can make it work. No, okay, and but there are ways to pay. But check is of all of them, that's the best.
So if you're attending by Zoom, just know that we do some pretty fun things at the live meeting. So we've got auctions where you can pick up some kind of cool equipment at a really, really great price. There's a lot more opportunities to chat and ask questions in the live meeting. And now that we're getting to be summer, oh my gosh, the Arboretum is incredible. Coming out of the Arboretum in the evening on this beautiful summer evening, oh, you guys are in for a treat. I'm so jealous. It's so beautiful there in the evening in the summer. So come on by the live meeting and kind of, you know, get together with your fellow beekeepers, because we all wear out our spouses talking about bees all the time. So come on in and talk with other people who love to talk about bees with you. And I just want to put in a plug for the American Bee Journal that Bruce just talked about. There is a really cool article in there this month on how bees feed on both the fat body and the hemolymph. So it's a fat body organ and basically the blood of the bee. So when I first started, or many years ago, beekeeping, they thought that the varroa mites fed just on the hemolymph. And then they decided that Sammy Ramsey discovered that the varroa mite feeds on the fat body. And now the researchers have determined that the varroa mite feed on both. They use the nutrients from the bee specifically so the varroa mite can reproduce. But there's a great little bit towards the end of the article that says, what's the take-home message? And it says, the one take-home message is that scientific knowledge is not static. It changes, and especially in beekeeping, the knowledge that we have changes. And one of the things you're going to need to do as a beekeeper is learn to keep your ideas open and flexible to learning new things. Science in beekeeping is changing at an incredibly fast rate as they discover the gut microbiomes and what's varroa mites do and all of these things. So we learn things and we learn them as absolute scientific truths and then prepare for it to change. Okay. So just stay flexible and keep learning. That'll keep your brain young. You have a lifetime of learning with bees. So is there anything else from the board that we missed before we move on to the bee chat time? We will be bee chatting until 7:30. Is there anything else? Did I forget anything? No? Oh, good. I got it all. So what we're going to do is the room is going to put their microphone on mute and I don't know if you turn our microphone down or what you do to make it so we're not distracting. And they're going to do their bee chat. And folks who are here on Zoom, this is a great time. We'll just have a half an hour of open questions and anything that's on your mind about your bees right now. How are your hives doing?
Just mention the two events coming up in May. This is Kit.
I'm sorry, what's coming up in May?
The two events that the PSBA
Oh.
will participate.
Yes,
The first,
yes.
the
Can
Tilt
you
Alliance
move
has their
closer to the
annual.
microphone?
You're a little
what?
echoey, Kit. Can you step all the way up to the microphone? You're a little echoey.
The animal sale. Testing. The edible plants is at the Tilt Alliance in Wallingford, and that happens on May 4th, which is a week before Mother's Day.
Wow.
No. So sorry. everybody.
Turn your mic.
And speaker.
Mm.
Let's see if that,
Thank you. Thank you.
all right, try again. Can you guys still hear us?
It's an echo chamber. So tell you what, when we come, why don't you go ahead and announce it to the room and then we'll announce the events here on Zoom. Is that okay, Kit? Okay, thank you. Oh, and Jeff wants to talk about, I'm sorry, there is one more thing. Jeff wants to talk about the swarm list sign up. Look at that. It's even got a QR code. We are modern. So up on the screen is a QR code. If you want to be on the swarm list, pull your phone out, take a picture of the chat. I don't know, Brian, I don't know if you guys have the chat up on the screen or not. You can also log in. It will also be in the newsletter. The newsletter, the swarm list signups are out and available. So, and there are a few requirements, a certain amount of experience and things like that. So if you're interested in being called, if there are swarms in the area, then Jeff has both a QR code and a link there that you can follow to be on the swarm list. Okay, and thank you, Jeff. Thank you for that. Thank you for that reminder. Okay, good. With that, let's hop into B chat. We got about 20 minutes before we get to hear from Dewey. So when we come back, Dewey Karen is here and he's going to talk to us about dead outs, and he's been doing an entire year's worth of work on diagnosing dead outs in mites. So I'm really excited to hear it. So let's hop into B chat for 20 minutes and then we get to come back and hear Dewey. Okay, guys. Let's try again. How are we doing? How's your hives? I see Magali's got her chickens again. Hi, Magali. Who did anyone here over winter hives and you maybe have questions about how your bees are doing?
Well, I had two hives and one didn't make it, but I was thrilled to see we got this warm weather and the other hive was just flying during that weather. And I checked into it and there was just like a couple little cubes of the solid sugar left, and I put in my box of 1-to-1 syrup. And so I'm looking forward to having my second year of this hive. So I'm thrilled.
Good. And did you happen to peek at any
Congratulations.
frames and make sure that there's brood and that you have a queen?
I did not do all that, but I will.
Okay. I have occasionally had hives come through where the queen got lost and there's still bees in there. And if you can catch it early, then you can catch it before they go laying worker. It's rare, but it is possible to have bees and no queen. So I always like to at least pull out a couple frames until I see brood, and then I know, okay, if I see brood, I have a queen and nothing to worry about.
Has anybody ever had a bee that swarm that will find your dead out hive?
Yeah.
And I wondered about that because I think my hive swarmed at the end of the summer because I have had no bees in there or dead bees, so they swarmed. And then I tried to overwinter, but I failed. And I'm just wondering, I'm like, well, will bees just show up in my hive? Does that ever happen?
They might show up, but they might show up. I'm sad to tell you that your bees didn't swarm in the fall. What happens in the fall is the bees that have varroa mites and high infection loads during August have a high viral load in the fall, and those sick bees fly out into the field and die. So it looks like they
Oh.
swarmed, but actually they went one at a time and died from the
Oh.
mites.
Oh.
So I have had swarms come in. I was cleaning a dead out years ago, and I reached down to pick up the lid to put it back on, and I turned around, and there I was in the middle of a swarm, and they were going in right when I was standing by the box. So it is possible if you have
Wow.
other bees near you that are looking for a place, they could swarm into your box.
Does it have to be open? Like
Nope.
you had yours open? No?
Nope.
Okay.
No, Kathy's had them fly into dead out. She used to be a commercial beekeeper, and they would fly into her stacks. Up at Rainy Day Bees, I've seen Peter's yard, and he has stacks of equipment, and he gets several swarms a year that fly into his stacked equipment. And
Wow.
it happens to all of us. It's a lucky thing when it happens, but it does happen.
Hmm.
I've
you.
had swarms move into my old equipment as well. And I think it's interesting because the swarm trap I put out for them is Thomas Seeley like approved, like it has all the things, and they picked the top bar in the backyard under the tree. So if bees have lived there, it seems to override their selection criteria, and it's just like, this is a good box, go for it. Someone lived here before. So just take your mouse guards off and leave the entrance open, and you might get a swarm.
And 80% of colony losses are due to the effect of varroa mites. So your goal, it's one of the harder things for new beekeepers to learn. It's really easy to feed bees and to plant flowers and to do the checks and things like that. But managing your varroa is the single most important thing that you can learn how to do. At next month's meeting, we'll be talking a little bit about that and the biology of the bees and their fat bodies. But also come out to the field days. And I coach on managing varroa a lot because I really want you guys to be able to be successful and have your bees overwinter. So either come to the field day, but do come next month.
Can you talk a little bit about how often I'm reading a lot of books and trying to gather information on treating for mites? Is it once a month? I'm not clear yet on how often to treat for mites.
There are a lot of philosophies. So the science is that you have to manage your mites. The art is how you do it. So the standard advice is that you get one of those mite wash cups and you test for mites once a month. And if your mites go over a certain threshold, then you treat. Now, it's really important to stick to that. And I have a different way that I treat, but I'm going to stick with the standard advice right now. It's really important that you test them every month. And I have a really low threshold for mites. If I get 1% of mites, which is 3 mites in that cup, I treat. I just have a really, really low tolerance for mites. And you want to make sure that you read up and decide. Yeah, there, Tracy's got the wash cup. So you want to go on Amazon or Man Lake and get one of those. They're fantastic, really easy to use. And if you're worried about doing the test, because it requires that you kill 300 bees, come to the apiary, and you can do ours first. And it makes it a lot easier to go home and do yours because it is a little hard the first time, but come on out to the apiary. You can see how it's done. It just makes it a lot easier. Decide what treatments you want to use and buy them now so that when your mite count is high, you are ready to jump on it right away. One of the easier ones, well, they're temperature dependent, so you might want to get something that can be used in cooler temperatures and something that can be used in warmer temperatures. Some easy ones for beginners to use are things like Thymol. Formic Pro is pretty easy. And I like to use oxalic acid. That's really gentle on the bees, but it is a little bit harder for beginners to learn how to use it. What about Tracy, Kathy? What do you think? Magali?
I totally agree. I love my mite check, and I test once a month. So once it gets above a 2% threshold, then I'll treat that colony, and I'll usually actually replace the queen because I don't really tolerate high mite loads in my apiary, but I do get that with swarms that I capture. So if that happens, consider replacing your queen. And then I love Thymol in the end of the season. It's pretty stinky though, and I don't want my frames and my wax smelling like that when I have my honey supers on. It's not approved for when you have supers on anyway, but it takes a long time to air that stink out of there. And I have tried the honey that they collect with the Thymol on it, and it tastes like Listerine honey. So I don't, not my favorite.
I was taught that when you're putting your 300 bees into a cup, you have to capture the nurse bees because those are the bees that you have to be tested. And I'm like, which ones are the nurse bees?
Yeah,
So
there's
That's a great question. So usually what I do is I find a frame where they're capping the brood. So it's got big brood in it. It's mostly capped. And then I give the frame a light shake, and the foragers jump off, and the nurse bees hang on for dear life. And then I smack it down in a bucket, and then the nurse bees are on the bottom. Whatever other foragers fly out, then I just shake it in the corner, scoop a half cup in, and then dump it in my box. So you're pretty much guaranteed that you've got nurse bees on there. But it's also really important to make sure your queen's not on that frame when you do that, because it sucks if you got the queen in there.
right.
and there's some recent research that shows that the Varroa also hang out on the young drones, the drones that haven't left the colony, and they kind of tend to hang out on the sides of the frames. So that's why I kind of have such a low tolerance, a 1% threshold, because I'm not sure that the scoop that I got represents if I got not enough drones or not enough nurse bees or things. So I just tend to err on the side of safety.
I just wanted to say that, I've had many students say, well, I don't want to kill 300 bees. And I say, well, kill 300 now or 30 to 60,000 later. Just go ahead and do the test. It is saving your colony. Those bees are only going to live 3 to 6 weeks anyway, if that makes you feel any better. But, do the test. It's really, really, really important. And my worst hive for mites this year came through after it had its treatments, and is the most booming hive. 2 full boxes all the way through the winter. So, treating is really, really important. And those mites vector 20 different viruses. So, you may not see that now, but you'll see it later in your bees. If they survive, they'll have K-wing or paralytic virus. There's just all sorts of things that can really affect your bees. So treat, test.
Yeah. And you almost never hear of colonies dying from being treated. I mean, the treatments, they might kill a little brood, but the queen quickly replenishes that. So they're just not as hard on the colonies as the mites are. The comparison is just, it's like trying to overcome an infection by yourself versus maybe the bad effects of taking a little penicillin, right? So yeah, don't be afraid to treat and test.
Great, thank you.
Last year, we had someone talk about a treatment. What if it was approved? This is how how you would make it. And just because we're a little bit further along the line, it would be nice to review that again if it ever.
Do you come out to the apiary, Cynthia? Are you, it's hard to know people in their veils or not. Are you there ever at the apiary?
I have not been.
Okay,
Uh,
okay. I think
Cynthia, have you gone to Randy Oliver's website, Scientific Beekeeping?
Randy
That's where you
Oliver,
find it.
This is Scientific Beekeeping.
I
If you
haven't,
go,
but I will.
if you
That's
go
where you,
into
that's where you find that.
if you go
See,
into
it's
our
not-
archive of PSBA meetings, we also had Randy Oliver, I think it was last year, talk at our meeting about this method of treatment. So you also will find that on the archive. You just go to YouTube
I
at
forgot
the
about
Puget
that.
Sound Beekeepers.
And Randy is not supported by any corporation. He's doing all his research and everything all on his own, he and his sons. And so you can really rely on the fact that he's telling you something is good, something is really good, because nobody's paying him to say that.
I may or may not have made a batch of that last weekend.
Yeah, may or may not be in the process also. And also for the latest on what the EPA said. So for those of you who we're kind of sidestepping around something, we're talking about oxalic acid slow release sponges, which has been shown to be pretty effective at knocking down phoretic mites. They don't do anything with capped brood, but if you've got phoretic mites, it's not a treatment. It just kind of helps keep the levels low. If you've got high mites, it's not going to work. But the EPA, what happened is Randy Oliver went through all of the hoops and he got it approved by the EPA and the FDA and the USDA because it goes into the food chain through honey. There's a lot of regulatory agencies that he got through all the hoops on. And he started out with a formula that was sugar syrup and a certain amount of oxalic acid. And by the time the years that it took between when he submitted that recipe and when approval came through, he had done enough experiments that he decided that there was a more effective recipe that included glycerin, which is a little stickier and the bees don't eat it. And it doesn't break down as much, I think. But it's a glycerin and oxalic acid instead. And it included more oxalic acid than his original recipe. And it was on a different carrier matrix. It was on a sponge instead of a shop towel. And so then what happened is that he changed his recipe.
Changed everything.
Changed everything, and the FDA pulled approval. So we were all like, yay, we're all good now. And approval got pulled. So I'm not, maybe Dewey will know when he talks to us if Randy is working on getting that through again. But the FDA in January came through with a statement that said that it basically said that what they're really worried about is people who sell honey that has an oxalic acid level in it above threshold. Okay, and so far the research that I've heard says that applying oxalic acid to your hives does not increase the level of oxalic acid within your honey to a level anywhere near the FDA threshold. Okay, so it really does not increase the level of oxalic acid in the honey, is what I've read and heard.
Is it up in the cupboard? I don't know.
Oh, and so
Sorry.
it's still not legal, right? So it is still not a legal something to use in your hives, but they've kind of said that they've kind of said where their concern level is with people who are selling honey and if the level goes above the threshold. And in the meantime, we're still waiting.
Bill's got his hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Yes, so I'm familiar with Randy Oliver and I've been to his website and sometimes hard to navigate as to what's the most recent, but I know maybe a year ago the oxalic acid dribble, if that's the right word, was big. And now he's talking about the sponges. I went and bought a bunch of them. Is the dribble still a viable treatment or should I just think of sponges?
The dribble's a viable option when there's no capped brood. It's highly effective when there's no capped brood. In fact, I use it on all my swarms after within 6 days. after they've, established and the queen started to lay, but there's no capped brood yet. It's amazingly effective. And you just dribble 5 cc's in between each frame of bees, and it is about 98% effective.
We're going to be talking Randy Oliver's oxalic acid extended release.
Sorry, I had an audio. Sorry, Tracy, go ahead.
Nope, that was done anyway.
Okay.
So with capped brood, skip that and go to sponge or do something.
Yeah, I'd skip that, and I'd skip the vapor too. I know people vary on that, but I mean, vapor is not effective really if there's lots of capped brood either. So you've got to do it so often, it's not really feasible if you've got a bunch of colonies to vape them every few days.
So what would you recommend then once we have capped brood, which I guess we already have now?
Use the sponges.
Yeah,
So-
so use sponges.
From a little bit of experience, once you're at the point of having cat brood midsummer, the sponges aren't going to help much in dropping your numbers. And in fact, Randy Oliver's had research the same way. You're more likely to need something more effective like Formic or Thymol or whatever. Oxalic does wonders during the wintertime when they're mostly phrenic. Phoretic there. During the summertime, you're gonna lean more towards the either chemical or organic treatments that aren't oxalic.
Yeah, so Thymol's not a good option in the summer because you've got your honey supers on, but Formic works great. The only problem with Formic using it in July and August, towards the end of July and early August, is it can be too hot. So if you're going to use Formic Pro or Mighty Quick Strips in the summer, they're probably your best option. Just make sure you look at the weather forecast and that you're within the temperature range, especially for the first 3 days. And they are approved for use with honey supers on.
But and you said the first 3 days, because sometimes people think it has to be during the whole treatment period, and it's during the first 3 days. And another thing to know about Formic is when used according to the label directions, it can have, when you use the 2 pads at the same time, it can penetrate the cappings on the capped brood and kill varroa within the cell. But if you do the single pad treatment, or if you do the single pad treatment where half of it is covered, or some of these kind of variations that are coming out now, I think that it reduces the chances that the product's actually going to penetrate the cell walls and get any varroa within there. So then it becomes more like a Thymol or another product like that. Because it used to be this magic bullet of being able to even kill the varroa within the cells, but I think we're watering it down enough now that it doesn't do that as much. And just briefly, I added to the chat, there is, I'm not recommending this. If you were looking for a recipe to see how Randy makes his sponges, there's like a 12-minute video there that is a really good demonstration of how that would be done. We got about 2 minutes left. Anything else, you guys? Any burning questions?
I'll add, if anybody's installing deep nuke frames into medium boxes, there are instructions on the PSBA's website that I created several years ago. I encourage you to check those out and get yourself a queen excluder because you'll need one.
I did have one
installation. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just had one last question. I know that the association has mentors, and I had signed up for that, but I never got a response. And I'm not sure if that's still an active program with the association, with the membership.
Where are you located?
I tell people I live in Covington, but I have a Kent address.
Oh, that's probably my bad. I'm the
Tracy, get on it.
Okay.
Send me another email. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so
Tracy
it is
has
something that's
answered, so you can always get a hold of me. I have people from all over the east side, so I don't mind answering questions.
okay. Great.
I don't,
Thank
I
you.
don't usually have people to my house, but I answer lots of questions on email and text in the summer.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is neighborhood captains, and you're also always you're always more than welcome to email or call or text any of the neighborhood captains. It doesn't just have to be in your area. I know Tracy and Kathy and we're all more than happy to hear from you and answer questions. So don't be shy about reaching out.
And I'd
Thank
also
you.
like to put a little plug for Tracy and I have a website on Facebook. If you do Facebook, it's Seattle Honeybees, and there's a lot of information and a lot of teaching that goes on there. So take a peek, and
Okay.
you can find out a lot of information, and we'll see you if you make comments. So
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, and so with that, let me finish typing here for a second. Let's go ahead and see how the room is doing, and we get to hear from Dewey. This is really exciting because we don't get to hear from Dewey very often. So I'm really, really thrilled. I know you. Hang on. Let's see if I can unmute these guys. They tend to get a little carried away, and oh, I lost. No, you're okay. So I'm gonna have to text somebody and get their attention. They get all chatty and they don't come back very well. So this is something we have to work on.
I can usually get Kevin, but he's not there tonight.
Oh, he's not? Okay. I'll try Kit. We'll see if she's looking at her phone.
Kit was answering me a little bit ago.
Yeah, I was.
They're all here. Was there
Oh,
something you
good.
want?
You guys are back. Okay, good. I always go, how do I get a hold of you guys in another room? Okay, good. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you guys had a great conversation. I feel like we had a really good conversation here. It's always so nice to hear the questions and the answers that everybody has, and never be afraid to ask a question because someone else is going to have that question too. And you're doing them a favor. So always speak up. Tonight, we get to hear from Dewey Karen, who is one of the greats in the Northwest on beekeeping, and he's done a lot of work. He had the Dead Out Task Force, which I got to participate in a little bit. I'm all the way up in the Skagit Valley, so I could never go in person, but I saw these guys out there in the rain, under tents, looking at frames, trying to figure out why hives died, and how to then describe that to people so they can diagnose their own dead outs. So I'm really excited to hear the results of all of that work. So without any further ado, I'm going to do a Kermit the Frog and go, yay, Dewey Karen's here. Take it away, Dewey.
All right, can you hear me? Am I coming through okay?
It's a little quiet. Is it possible to turn up a little louder?
Yeah.
Oh, now you're on mute. Oh, there we go. And if not, I think we can figure out how to turn our speakers up at home. Maybe it's probably in your microphone. If you go to your the little speaker in the lower left-hand corner, there's an audio setting.
Okay, is that
There
better?
you go. Yep,
Is that
now
better?
we can hear you.
Getting better?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Don. We're actually doing the part 2 or the continuation of the task force. We're going to meet Saturday, but this time it promises not. It was raining very hard that day. It really was. This time it promises to be a little bit better. So we'll see how that goes. For those that were on the email, not at live, the other group, they had a discussion about oxalic acid extended. There is a product coming onto the market. It's not yet available, but it will be a legal product. In other words, one that will work for the same type of extended release of oxalic acid. Voroxan is the name of it, but it will be on the market. It's not there yet, though. Okay. Can you see my screen full? Or are you seeing the
I see
preview?
notes. Yeah, your notes are there also.
Okay, that should not be the case. Let's see if we can get
In my experience, it's usually under display settings. If you go at the top and you click on the little arrow down at the top.
At the top here.
Yep, just above where you are, display settings.
Oh. Up a little
Above
higher,
that,
all the way
just
up
a
at the
little bit
top.
higher on your screen.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it on my screen.
There are three things that say show taskbar, display settings, and end slideshow.
No, I'm not seeing that on mine.
Aha.
Oh dear.
So when the notes show up, it's because there's two screens when you go to do a
Yes.
share screen. So
Yeah.
just choose the other screen when you do a share screen.
Okay. Oh, that's black screen. We don't want that one.
I wonder if he could make somebody co-host and if they could do it, because I'm seeing the display settings at the top.
There we go.
Okay.
That work?
No, well, it might be okay. It just wouldn't be full screen. The other option is you can go to the top of the screen where it says stop share in a red button. Just stop the sharing
Yep.
and then start again
Yep.
and choose the
Let's try
other
again.
screen. And it should show a number on your screen. Maybe, well, if you have two screens, it does, but
Yeah. Screen 2. Let's try screen 2.
yay, there we are. You got it.
Okay. All righty. So you're seeing just the one. Okay. Very good.
Yep.
Excellent. All righty. As promised, we're going to talk about CSI. Dead hives have a tale to tell. And there we are, exuberant that we have had some survivorship or total survivorship. And so starting initially with a commercial, if I could, I do a Pacific Northwest honeybee survey every year. The survey is now open. It goes through the month of April. So if you had overwintered colonies, I encourage you to go on and participate in the survey. This is the survey from last year. And you can see from last year that 20 participants from the sound group sent in information. They had a 27% loss, which was better than 4, 6, 7, 8 percentage points better than overall Washington State, 120 different participants. So I encourage those that have had overwintering. It is pnwhoneybeesurvey.com. And what I do then with the information is talk about losses. So this is the level of losses. You can see very good for those 27 individuals last year. And I ask how many you had in the fall, how many in the spring by hive type. So Langstroth 8, Langstroth 10, etc. So this is overall Washington State level of losses. You can see equal levels of losses for Langstroth 8 framers in the fall going into winter, 36%, Langstroth 10 framers, 35, and overall with all the various hive types. So pnwhoneybeesurvey.com, click on take the survey. And for those that have participated already, thank you. It is open till the end of April. In addition to talking or asking you about your survivorship or illustrated here as losses, I'm also asking about some managements, including management for mites, sampling, how you sampled, etc. And then chemicals or other treatments that you use as well. So I appreciate those that have participated. So where are we in our season? We've just gone through our first day of spring. And so in our season with bees, we are at the point where the queen has started egg laying, as indicated in questions, etc. There's a fair amount of brood. There is some drone brood. And at this point, they are very concerned with growing the family of the queen laying eggs. Mostly fertilized eggs, but also unfertilized eggs for drones and interest in growing a family. And where are we in terms of our management? Well, our aspect now is to assess those dead outs, do a necropsy if we find some that have not survived. And then those that have survived, to keep them alive. This is a critical time for colonies, as indicated Tracy with her early presentation. We want to stimulate the weaker colonies because we can still lose them over, quote, our winter. We can still have a return of wintry type conditions, although it's going to get better next week. Certainly, we're not through winter by all means. We ought to try to, as our weather improves and foraging conditions improve, to do a good disease inspection, looking particularly for colonies that might be susceptible for chalk brood, colonies that might possibly have American foul brood. This is the time to do it in the spring. And of course, then are also for colonies that might come down with some of the spring diseases, the stress diseases of EFB or sac brood. We want to look for the Goldilocks effect. Of course, in Goldilocks, we're looking for the colonies that are just right. We want to then find those that are strong and weaken them, and those that are weak, not weak, we want to strengthen them. We're going to continue guiding development, and then before our spring cycle there, the green is over, we're going to be adding supers to those colonies that seem to be doing well, keeping it together, us helping keep them together from swarming. So those that are super worthy. Now, some of our splits will not be, some colonies will stay weak, some that have a heavy chalk brood, for example, may not be. Those that come down with EFB and it really sets them back a bit, but at least supering those that are stronger colonies that we're facing that. I mentioned the Goldilocks effect, and the Goldilocks effect is one of our first assessments of our surviving colonies. So we may have colonies that are too weak, shown on the left. There's only bees on a couple of seams there. In other words, on a couple of frames. That's and only on partial of those frames. We may have colonies on the right that are very strong in our first assessment and looking at them. But hopefully, the Goldilocks effect, we have some that are in the middle or just right. And of course, we name this after Goldilocks going into the forest and going into a cottage and finding porridge that was too hot, too cold, or just right, and ate it all up. Okay. Well, this is a single box beekeeper, single brood chamber beekeeper. He puts on candy boards. So you can see in the middle illustration very clearly, pulled back on the top is the candy board, and the bees have gone through most of the candy. There is some candy still left, and you can see bees gathered around it where they're creating a slurry out of that hard sugar candy. And you can see we can count bees on about 4 seams, on about 4 frames, going over to the other adjacent frames. And that would be a colony just right. The colony on the right, that box pulled back, you see they've pretty much consumed all of their candy board. There's not much left in that rim that's on the top. And the bees go virtually from side to side on the box that you see there. Now these are this is on the right is an 8-frame box. And I don't show you the candy board on the one that's too weak, but most of the candy was still there. There just wasn't the critical mass to make a slurry out of it. And so they were weak. So some of our assessment is which ones are strong, which ones are the weak. We can do something to strengthen the weaker ones, feeding, for example, not too early to feed sugar syrup to stimulate them. We can boost them, and often with our strong colonies, particularly those that are already filling that box, we're going to need to do something with them, and often that's weakened. And one of our management things that we can look at is taking from the strong to bolster the weak. Taking frames of cap brood, for example, taking frames that have bee coverage of the younger nurse age bees, for example. So weakening the strong colonies and bolstering the weak ones. Doesn't mean we give up on the just right ones in the middle, not yet, certainly, but hopefully we'd like to try to get the strong ones more to the just right and the weaker ones strengthened so that they become a colony that is better, that we might describe as just right. Now, one of the things that is a feature of our early spring is an imbalance in the population. So among the worker bees, there is a caste. Some describe it as a caste. We call it division of labor, for example, among the workers. And that we recognize 4 major groupings of workers in colonies. Well, where the arrow is to the upper left right now is we have imbalance in our spring colonies with older bees. In other words, forager age bees. These are bees that have overwintered. They were reared in the last fall. They are older age, so they're not as efficient at doing the other tasks that workers must do in their home. Those are cell cleaners. The bees, when they first emerge, are fixing the cells from which their sisters have emerged, cleaning out the dead bees, doing all those activities we recognize as cleaning. Then the nurse age bees are those that have had development of the hypopharyngeal glands. These are the ones that are feeding the larva for those 5.5 days, 6 days if it's a drone, that they're in the larval stage. And finally, all the other tasks, the building of comb, the provisioning of the food that's coming in, particularly the pollen that's coming in early in the season. All of those other tasks are the middle-aged bees. Pretty soon, with a couple of generations, the colony becomes imbalanced in middle-aged bees. The foragers die, they're the older bees, and then they're eventually going to be replaced by bees that go through those first 3 aspects of their caste development: cell cleaning, nursing, and then on to middle-aged activities that they do. But those middle-aged bees in their imbalance are those that create the conditions that can lead to swarming. Colonies get very congested in the brood area. There are a great number of bees that are nurses. The middle-aged bees don't yet have a great number of activities to do. If you have nothing but drawn comb, there's no work to do with wax, or very little work to do with wax. Doesn't take much to process the pollen that comes in. There's often not much nectar coming in. So the food processing that middle-aged bees, the comb construction at middle-aged bees, all those activities, there's not much to do. And so they just kind of clog things up, and that then leads to conditions that then are ripe for the colony to go ahead and begin the swarm cells, or the queen laying eggs in a cup that will lead to swarming. So it is really about the imbalance, and as I say, right now it is in most colonies we've got more foragers and not enough bees to do the hive activities. That will change. So one of our first activities is to try to determine if we do not have some surviving colonies, what happens. As Dawn indicated we do not have an apiary inspection service here in Oregon. So the local clubs serve as mentors for people, beginners and otherwise, that have issues with their bee colonies. We call them a task force. And so the individuals will say, something's going on in my colonies, I'm not quite sure what's going on, and ask for help from the task force. I'm going to start with a tale of our task force visiting, and this happens, I'll start with a fall instance. So beekeeper had 2 colonies. There were some issues that were going on. The colonies were from 2 nuke colonies that the beekeeper bought, established in the spring. The beekeeper had not done any mite counts through the year. And after they were established, they use oxalic, a dribble in this case. And when they noticed that there were some issues was when they were putting formic on colonies in October, and things just didn't look right. So one of the things we ask people that are asking for task force members from their local club to come out is, can you send photos? What's going on, so that we have an idea of what we might be looking for. So they had sent from the lower box on a colony on the left 3 photos of 3 different frames. They said there were bees in the top box, and at the current time they were doing a formic treatment. They said their other colony looked good. The other colony, the one on the right, seemed okay, not a problem. So the photos that they sent were, this one was the first photo sent. And often we get photos that are not relevant, but this beekeeper, it was a couple, actually sent 3 very relevant photos. So here's the first photo that was sent. Looks like in this photo from a brood frame that there were no bees covering it all. There's no cluster, no effect of a cluster here. So this is October. There should be bees clustering, but not certainly here. So, but this is a brood frame, and you can see there are 2 brood areas. So there's a brood area here to the left of the illustration you're looking at. Ugly looking brood, very spotty looking brood, punctured cells, sunken cells, some mold growing already on some of the cells that had brood in them. Not anything in terms of any open brood, but just all cat brood, but all dead because it was not a covering of bees, and we'd been starting getting some cool nights. But also on the photo, we can see a second brood area. And what it appears is that the bees had moved away from an ugly brood area, maybe ugly because of mites, we'll get to, and established a new brood area. And this new brood area looked much better, looked in much better shape, a lot fewer punctured cells, a little bit more compact than the existing brood area. So they had moved. There was a spotty pattern and certainly the perforated brood on the left portion. So that was brood frame 1. Here was a second one, still looking at a brood frame, very widely scattered, perforated, sunken, discolored brood. Adults unable to merge, adults in some cases partially out, head out, but not getting any further than that. But we could take a forceps or a toothpick and go into any one of these capped brood cells, and what was inside came out. So we could grab it or pick it with a toothpick, but it did come out. An important characteristic to look for. And the third photo they sent was this one. And this is also very telling. And as I said, they sent 3 great photos. This is a frame that shows robbing. It was a frame that had honey on it. Some of it crystallized in the cell, not all of it, but robbing, because you can see the cappings are just all torn off, all torn, partially removed, and there's lots of white stuff of honey droppings from honey, crystallized honey too, in the cells, sitting on the edge of the cells, and had fallen to a board on our debris board on the bottom. So 3 good frames that all of them focusing in on the fact that this colony was dead. So the task force looked at a couple more frames. So here we are in the lower box again. This illustration, the task force taking a look at it and taking some photos. And here's some more frames. You can see some scattered brood. You can see some robbing, particularly on this top frame, the area to the right, the area to the left on the frame. Some more indications of robbing. So there's a lot of evidence of robbing, and no cluster, no evidence of any cluster having formed in all of these frames, so that the diagnosis certainly that was a dead colony. And the beekeeper had indicated that there were bees flying in and out of the left colony. Yes, there were. They were the robbing bees. There was a lot of robbing going on. There was a lot of honey in that particular colony. And so that was what had confounded the issue with the beekeeper, thinking that, well, that was still a live colony. How can can a task force come and help me with a diagnosis? On the right colony, which was judged by the beekeepers as doing okay, it was a ghost, because they had robbed out a colony that had a high mite count, as evidenced by the frames that we looked at and the 2 frames that were sent as the illustration. High mite numbers, those mites then were transferred back to the other colony, the one on the right, And the task member is looking at the entrance, and yes, there was activity, but a fair amount of that activity was just robbing bees. So there were still bees, but by this time, a treatment with formic acid was too late in the year, and indeed, they did not survive the winter. So dead outs, trying to figure out what was going on. One county dead, the other one on its way, although it could easily be mistaken for two counties, lots of flight activity on the days that it was, halfway decent for flight, but one dead and one on the way out. So reading dead outs, doing a necropsy on a county that's dead. This case, one of the club's apiaries, the club members had gone to the apiary in March, mid-March. They found a weak county. This is a county that has, it was a split. It was two shallow or two half-depth boxes. They saw the queen and a visit in mid-March, but judged that they were light on honey stores and were not a big county. They were judged in March to be on the weaker side, but still very live. And the queen was laying eggs. In April, this county was dead. Now the county on March, the decision was made that they were weak on stores. Because this colony happened to be in two mid-sized boxes, not a full depth. Most of the other counties were full depth frames. There was no way to transfer a frame of honey to the county from another of the stronger counties. So the decision was made to feed it. In mid-March, the decision was made to feed with sugar, dry sugar, granulated sugar. So a piece of newspaper was put down on the top bars, and you can still see that piece of newspaper by looking at the box underneath the two frames I'm holding there in my hands. And then dry sugar added to the top of the newspaper. However, with continuing cool weather that particular spring, by April, the county was dead. The feeding of the dry sugar was not sufficient to be able to continue the colony for another month and let them survive. So I'm holding the frames here of the dead colony. You can see the clustered bees. The bees were on about 3 frames, so it's on the weaker side because these are not standard frames. It's certainly on the weaker side, but there was no honey. So the amount of honey that was seen in March had been consumed. Most of the sugar had been consumed, but it was not enough to sustain the colony. Why not a decision to feed sugar water? This is a club apiary and it was not visited regularly. So had we put sugar water feeder on there, the bees would have consumed the sugar water and then the jars would have sat empty. So the decision, and in addition, recognizing that there's a lot of moisture in our March colonies, the decision was made not to feed a sugar syrup, but to feed dry sugar. And it was, in this case, not sufficient. So we're now saying, well, this colony died from starvation. That may or may not have been the case. So what are the reasons why we will find a dead out, and how can we do that necropsy? Well, we would think that colonies will not survive the winter because of starvation. We will see that the adult brood is sparse. There's few dead bees on the bottom board and no honey reserves. But you have to make sure the honey reserves are not because of robbing. Generally, it would be a pretty small brood area. In this case, it was in March. Another reason we think we'll have dead outs in the spring is because there were just too few bees. The bees died from a cold snap, a period when they could not get out. Again, small adult remains, often they're outside of the brood area. They've left the brood area to try to cluster on honey, and honey would be present or robbed as part of the factor. We can get split clusters with the bees going in one direction. This will happen, for example, in top bar hives and wary hives. they'll go in two different directions to stay in contact, but you end up with two clusters, two grouping of bees to stay warm, and neither of them being critical. So again, dying from the being too cold from freezing. And finally, we can have instances where the top is not insulated. The moisture accumulates on the top surface, like on the inner side of the inner cover, or on covers, or whatever you have above the frames, and then condenses and rains back down on the bees. So moisture. So those are some of the things we might look for in our necropsy. However, the major factor in losses is going to be mites. And in fact, freezing, starvation, even moisture can be the indirect effect of mites and the things that mites have done, damaging the colony, the stress that the mites have created through the year, the factor that the colonies are not able to raise enough bees to get through the winter itself. And so there's not enough bees and they die because there are too few bees as a critical mass. Well, that's what we might look at initially, but in fact, what has really been the case has been the factor of mites. And we were just generally will say this is the parasitic mite syndrome. Some will label this as parasitic mite brood syndrome. Now, when I do the survey that I mentioned earlier, and I hope we'll get some good, strong participation from the sound beekeepers again this year, some of you will say, well, my colony died because mice had moved in, or I had issues in my colony with skunks visiting them in the fall and they weakened the colony, or there was heavy yellow jacket predation on my colony, or not so much in our area, but in other parts of the US, because the small hive beetle had taken over. They slimed part of the colony and the bees then couldn't get to the honey, and you know, small hive beetles took over for my bees. Again, these are factors that we might come up with our necropsy, but in fact, they're really all secondary. Something else is going on. That something else in most cases is, again, mites, the major factor that's in losses. So let's look at each of these instances and try to make our assessment. In any assessment of a necropsy, or in the fall when we're trying to determine, is this colony at risk of not surviving the winter, we need to start with what is healthy. So I have a frame. You can see that there is honey in the corners. You can see that there is a large portion of the frame. The bar at the bottom is the bottom bar of cap brood. And then there are some open cells in the middle of the cap brood. So the question we should ask, is this an indication of a colony at stress, or does this look like a colony that might be in pretty good shape? Is it a healthy colony? So when we look at this colony, we might want to focus on this portion here, this middle portion in among all of the cap brood. Now the cap brood that we see just looks great. Very few cells that are not occupied at this point during the capped stage. Very few cells, very solid, but except there is this middle portion that there is no cap brood. So focusing on that, what we need to take a look at is why is this a spotty brood pattern? Is something going on? Well, if we look around where these cells are empty around these edges, we can see here and here and here and here and here. Right here at this point in time, we can see 5 bees trying to get out of their cell, trying to emerge from the capped stage to become bees to join the population. So what we're actually looking at is the queen, when she came onto this frame 21 days earlier, she started laying eggs in that middle portion. And so the area where the question mark is where the bees have emerged, or as we now look at it, bees emerging. So what we want to look in that middle portion, has the queen come back to this frame and then the cells are being cleaned by the nurse HBs, is she now putting eggs back into it? So by looking at the cap pattern, we would say very healthy, not a spotty pattern at all. And in the middle, this is where they're emerging. So we want to see, has the queen come back to this particular frame? Now, one other area we might focus on, I'll bring in another question mark, is this part here. So here's a couple, 3 cells in a row between the capped brood cells and the cells that have honey in them. You don't quite see to the top bar on this illustration, but you can see just above the curve of that question mark, that's cells that are filled with honey. So what in the world is going on here? Why didn't the queen put eggs in these cells where she did in the middle? Is this an indication maybe a too few bees? She didn't expand her brood rearing? Well, no, actually, you can see the cells sort of have a yellowish cast to them from that question mark, particularly going to the right. These are the cells that held the bee bread, the converted pollen. So when these eggs had eclosed and gone to the larval stage, this is the bee bread that the bees actually, where they went for bee bread to actually feed the larvae, to feed themselves so they could make the brood food. So this is that, now it's all been used up because they use that bee bread to have this great amount of brood from the eggs that the queen had laid. So prognosis, healthy or unhealthy? Prognosis, certainly very healthy. We just want to see, has the queen come back and starting to lay eggs again in that middle empty cells. The cells already look cleaned, ready for her egg laying. So it all starts with healthy. If in doubt, take a sample. So I have a toothpick here. I've pulled out a larva that was sort of off color, wasn't quite in a C-shaped position I was expecting it to be. So I pulled it out with a toothpick, determining if it was alive. When I pulled it out, does it indicate a brood disease? And of course, if we're looking at cells before the cap stage, we're looking at one of the spring stressors, EFB, we're looking for chalk brood perhaps, we're looking for sac brood. We're not looking for A if it's still in the larval stage. So if in doubt, pull it out, check and make sure it's healthy. Now, looking in the middle, we'd like to be able to see perhaps some cells that have eggs in them, and those are the 5 cells to the left of the illustration I've just brought in. And some cells in which the eggs have developed to the embryo stage. Bee eggs don't hatch, they just mold into the C-shaped larva. And just above the question mark there, we can see a C-shaped larva, the very first larval stage, the instar. There are roughly 5 of them. So every day they about double their size. And it's resting on a pool of its food. Now, the eggs look like they're about to become larvae because they're no longer kind of sticking up looking at us. They have leaned over as the embryo cells develop in the egg. So those eggs are about to become larvae, but we're more concerned with those 6 cells that have larvae in them. Particularly where I've got the question mark, that cell, or any of the others right around it. What are we looking at? What is our concern here? When nurse bees initially put worker jelly in the cell, the larva floats on a pool of this jelly. That is initially off-white color. But you can see above where the question mark is on that insert that it is clear. And the other thing we can see is that initially there is quite a big pool. So you can hardly see the larva floating on that milkish color. It's sort of, the larva is that color as well because there's so much food in the bottom of the cell. These cells don't have much food at all, and it's not that nice milky color we initially would like to see. It's an indication of stress. It's an indication, particularly we see this in spring, where we do not have a good nurse bee population in the colony, and the older bees, what we will call the forager group, have had to revert and try to produce brood food for their baby, developing baby sisters, the larvae. And they're not able to do so because they're older and their glands are not as efficient. So there is stress here because there's not enough food. It's a bit off color. So this is an indication that you may see, but it may also disappear quickly. A good indicator is that this is a stressor, and we might be able to help the colony by providing some more food for the bees. They're just not getting out. In some cases, if we're going to make nukes from this colony, we're going to want to make splits from our colony. We might also think of stimulating with a sugar syrup and helping the colony develop. It will be at some level of stress until enough nurse age bees are present to help and get into the routine of feeding those larvae that need that food. So determining what is healthy is a good start in determining perhaps why did the colony not survive winter, or is it at stress in the fall or in spring? Okay, returning to our necropsy of our dead colonies, I indicated one of our determinations might be that the colony starved. On the left, a colony that was a full depth and above the top of medium depth. We pulled out 3 frames from the dead colony. You can see the bees were on the weaker side. There were bees on 3 frames. So we would have looked down on the top and saw bees roughly on 2 seams, three seams, weaker, on a little bit weaker side, but dead. And as we look at the frame that's on the bottom where I've circled in red, we can see that the queen had been present. She was actually laying eggs, and that's her brood pattern. This is a nice solid brood pattern. Virtually every cell has a capped bee, developing capped bee, but they did not survive. We don't see any honey in the frames of these 3 where the cluster was located, and we'd have to go to the very edge to see any honey at all. Now, the frame on the right shows a larger colony. This is a full depth colony, a full depth frame. Again, we're looking at dead bees when we do our inspection in the spring. Most of you have already looked at your colonies, or with the nice weather coming, we'll have a chance to do so. But these bees dead. And again, on this frame or immediately adjacent frames, no honey. So we might then make our determination from our necropsy, this colony starved. And in fact, that could be the case, but always in looking at it, what's the population? Why is the population of both of these colonies not that just right, that colony in the middle? Why is the population a little bit, and when we discover the dead out, a little on the weaker side? We might see this situation. So here, what do you see? What are we looking at here? You can see that this is a dead colony when we discover it in the spring. We can see they had a number of cells of bee-pred, the kaleidoscope of colors, number of cells. There's a little bit of mold in some of the cells that's beginning to develop. A little bit of evidence of crystallization of the honey that's on top. That's the whitish you kind of see in some cells. Let's focus in where the bees themselves are. Oh, you can see that this is a nice looking frame, by the way. Notice up here along the top bar, the bees have reinforced those cells with propolis, helped to strengthen that frame, helped to give it some form. So nice looking frame. So let's focus on what else we might see. We see in this colony some dead bees on the bottom board, not an unusual amount, but maybe a mantle, kind of soggy bees on the bottom board. Some honey on other frames. No honey on this particular frame, but there perhaps on some other frames there was some honey, not a lot, but some. Mite treatment was not done. We didn't get mite treatments on, or when we did, it was late. We didn't get them on until the end of September or October. We did not have a chance to take mite number samples, or if we did, you know, we weren't sure what the numbers meant. We were finding numbers that were above 3% in terms of 3% per 100 adult bees. We see some mite poop in cells. It's white and it's usually on the upper side of the cells walls itself, but not an inordinate amount, but some. We don't see on this frame any capped brood cells on this photo, on this frame, but there were some on what had been the brood area of the rest of the colony. So what are we looking at then? Let's focus in on this portion. Let me blow that up. There's our queen, our dead queen. Okay, we can see the pollen off to the right. That's stored bee bread, not pollen, but stored bee bread. We see most of the cells filled with a bee. We're looking at bee butts. We're looking at the end of the abdomen of the adult bees. And most of the cells, not every last one, but most of them filled. But then we don't see any honey. Okay, so this is where the cluster would be. At the point where they're clustered, and these bees are clustered. Now, the bees that we see on the bottom board are these bees that were around the queen. So they, when we moved the frame out or to take a look at it, these are the bees that fell off or they fell before we moved this frame. And these are the bees that we see sitting on that bottom board down below. But we don't see any honey. So this is where the cluster was. And the cluster should be in contact still with some frames of honey. Had there been honey, this colony might still be alive, but rather than our reading of dead. Okay. Now, we can get still this year spring starvation, a dead out still in some colonies still to come. A couple of other things that will appear. The bottom board shown here in the illustration will be a good amount of the population. Sometimes so many dead bees, they're even coming up into the frames themselves, just loaded with dead bees. And again, no honey that we would see really visible, even on the outer frames. This was a pretty good sized colony because you could see there are dead bees on the bottom board from side to side. So these are bees that died from a pretty good size amount of bees in the colony itself. And the way that we can help confirm perhaps that this was a spring starvation was that by looking at weather reports. So that when we get an early spring, February was a very mild month in our region. And then a colder month, March is still going to be milder, but a little bit colder than February generally. And if we get a period of time where it was a cold snap of several days in a row, and then we see this type of a situation in our colony, it may well have been a spring starvation. Not necessarily related to mites, simply a big colony that expanded and just ran out of food. They just did not have enough food. Hefting this colony from the back, or if you weigh colonies, you might have been able to do this diagnosis. Bees pile up. So a spring starvation as being different from a starvation that had occurred and they're dead by January or February in other situations. Starvation. Many people will put this down as the reason why they think they lost colonies in this PNW honeybee survey. But in fact, it is not as common as we believe. Often it is because there is honey in a colony, but the bees just could not get to it because there was not a critical mass, enough bees to get to where the honey was. Now, that diagnosis of bees freezing because there was not the critical mass would occur in situations such as this from another frame. So here's a frame from a brood area. pretty large brood area because you can see capped cells that were the result of the queen laying eggs in the fall, but the brood never emerged. They never got past the cap stage to become adult bees for the population. And so the bees moved off of their brood area, and by the time we found it, the cluster, now this cluster has gotten pretty moldy by the time of this photo, there is relatively small amount of bees. And the bees immediately where they are, there is no honey. So the few cells to the left, the few cells to the right, no honey left in any of those frames, any of those cells. There's honey a little bit further to the left and a little bit further to the right, but not where the bees are. And again, this probably is of a cluster that froze, ran out of honey. Yes, starvation, but there wasn't the critical mass. So perhaps the diagnosis here of colony that was too small, not the critical mass. And so there just were not in contact with enough honey. They could not leave their cluster to get honey and bring it back to the bees, and they died because of too small a mass or from freezing. Another situation where that may occur, so here's a colony, there is some brood. The bees are still over some cells of cap brood. You can see that on the just below where the bees, some of the bees have fallen to the bottom board. So this was not the full cluster, but you'll also see on the surface here this mold that's forming. What has happened here is probably too much moisture. So the top of this colony was not properly insulated. The bees, as they lived, as they were rearing brood, the heat escaped from the brood and the clustered bees. The warm air went upwards and hit a cold surface, the inner cover or the covers, whatever, condensed there, and then the moisture moved back down on the bees. To dry themselves out, the bees moved around a lot more, consumed more food. So immediately here, we don't see any honey at all, but we see the cap brood, meaning they had to have a need for honey immediately to help raise more bees, but the effects of the moisture from that molding. So this could have been an effect of moisture, could have been too few bees, but also moisture causing bees to move too much, use too much of their food stores. Wet bees, and again, in this case, you'll see bees on the bottom board, often more than from too few bees from the freezing condition. So those will often be the cases that we say, well, this is what I think the colony died from. But we have to look a little bit closer in terms of the rest of the brood area of the colony. So here's a dead colony. There was no cluster left in the colony. What we pull out is this brood frame. This is about the middle frame, the frame number 4 or 5. You can see a brood that did not emerge. This is cap brood. So the queen had laid eggs, the larvae were fed, reached the cap stage, but by the time it reached the cap stage, the bees were moving away from their brood area to try to stay warm on the cold nights in the fall. So these are our September, October nights. And so this brood got too cold and did not emerge. And it's really kind of evident in this frame because where most of the cap brood did not emerge is around the edge of that brood area. So you can kind of see most of the cap brood is at the bottom edge. And as the bees consolidated and moved into the clusters on those cold nights, they left this brood behind. And yet these are the bees that could have been the bees that helped them get through winter. So although the queen had laid eggs, there still was bee bread to serve them. You can see below the cap brood bee bread here in cells. There's still capped honey in both corners, but they were moving away from cap brood in the fall. And these are bees that they needed to get through winter, the bees that would live through the winter period. So this is a good example of what we're going to call PMS, parasitic mite syndrome. No or too few bees to take care of the brood to rear enough bees to get through the winter period. Yes, we might diagnose this as that small cluster or the starvation, but what really finished them off was they just didn't rear enough bees. They didn't because they had too high a mite number in the colony. There is honey, as I pointed out here in the upper left of the frame. Here's another good example. Lots of honey there on the left above the hive tool, the red portion, the hook of the accent hive tool. And then brood that's left behind, mold forming, the brood bees moving off their brood area, doing so in the fall, consolidating in the fall, simply not enough adult bees. Bees that should have hatched, should have been hopefully bees that would live through the winter, not having a chance to become adults, eclose as the adult stage, and joining a population that would help overwinter the colony. So again, a spring colony, this is like frame 3 or 4 of what would have been the brood area. And you can see again the capped honey that is there and this leftover brood. At this point, it looks ugly. Our diagnostic that we need to do with this to determine it is PMS, not a case of American foul brood particularly, is go into some of those cat brood and be sure that they can be removed, that they come out. So what should we have been looking for in the fall? All right. Several clues that might help us in the fall make a determination that this is a dying colony or this colony has a reduced chance of getting through the winter. One, low adult populations. So I haven't shaken bees off this particular frame. You can see a brood area that extends, about, 3/4 of the frame. But here, this nice looking brood area here at the edge, cat brood, pretty solid brood, nice solid pattern. That is not being covered by bees when we pull this frame out. The adults are over here at the middle of the brood area, trying to keep that amount of brood open. But if you look among that brood area, this brood area is very spotty. A few adults, a few cap cells, open cells, a lot of open cells here, there, and elsewhere. So a spotty pattern underneath where the adults are. We will find bees that have not reached the cap stage that the larvae are in some sort of issue. We call that condition snot brood because it's sort of what it looks like. It's not European foul brood symptoms. It's not American foul brood, not chalk brood. It's brood that is grayish, is dying. It's out of place, elongate, but doesn't have any of the characteristics of what we call the brood diseases. We will see among the spotty brood uncapped cells. I'll show you a photo in a minute. And in those uncapped cells, we will find some cells that have mite poop in them. So this is what we might have judged in our September look. This colony may be dead by November. It might be dead when we look at it come spring, and being that characteristic of PMS, although we might not find very much honey. You can see there is some honey in this particular frame, a few cells of capped honey and cells that are not yet capped or cells that they've gone into the capped honey and diluted. Bees actually don't eat honey. They have to dilute it to be able to eat it. So we see some liquid in some cells. And so that's the cell. That's the honey that they're eating at this particular stage. Or perhaps it's nectar that has come in that they are ripening. Spotty brood pattern. Here's an example, extreme example of a spotty brood pattern. This is really a serious brood pattern. Again, not a good adult pattern of coverage here. When we pull this out, we may have shaken this frame, so we have shaken some of the adults off of the frame. Now, uncapped brood. What we're looking for in our fall assessment, trying to determine is this colony in some sort of stress, in addition to the low mite numbers, is this tendency that there is not a solid brood pattern. So a very spotty brood pattern we can see here from hygienic bees, which is a good quality of colonies. But the hygienic bees, those middle-aged bees are the hygienic bees. They can't tell which cell might have a mite in it. So I've circled a whole series of cells here. So some of the hygienic bees in this colony have determined there is a cell that has developing mites in it, and they're looking for it. So they have uncapped a bunch of capped cells, in other words, that had already been capped. They're uncapping them, and they're looking for the cell that might have the mite in them. Well, the issue is once they have uncapped it, other bees will come along and yank out the developing brood, in this case, pupae that are in the cells. Now, the cell that has the mite in it, the mite runs out once the cell is uncapped, and that cell no longer will successfully reproduce more mites. So that's a good quality of hygienic bees. But again, they can't tell exactly which cell, so they uncap a bunch of cells. You can see an area here of about 25 cells. They've uncapped about 1/4 of the cells, looking for the one that might have developing mites in it. They can't tell mites are in the cell until the baby mites are developing in a cell. That's their chemical clue that they use. Now, some of the cells and some types of bees will be recapped. So I brought in another circle here, and this cell shows the surface of some capped cells that look a little wonky, particularly the one that's at the left side. It looks sort of like it's got an indent in it, a little bit darker in the metal. That's a cell that might have been uncapped but recapped. And hygienic bees that recap are the reason why some groupings of bees in some places in the world can successfully combat mites, more successfully combat mites than our bees in North America will do. So this would be characteristics of a population that's in Sweden, the south of France, the bees that are in Cuba, Africanized bees. All of those will uncap, will disrupt the mite in her reproduction, but these are bees, groupings of bees that recap cells. In other words, don't sacrifice all of their developing young. I mentioned another characteristic, and that other characteristic was not brood. So I've circled 4 cells at the very bottom on the bottom bar of this plastic frame. 2 of the 4, even from the 30,000 foot altitude here that we're looking in, you can see don't look normal. These are not the white C-shaped larvae that are in the bottom of the cell, glistening, sitting on some food. These are grayish in color. They are sort of elongate. They're sort of boat-shaped. And if we pull them out with forceps or toothpick, they're dead or they're in the process of dying. This is what we call that not brood characteristic. It's not European brood, fowl. It's not sac brood. It is something different. This has been labeled as IBDS. That's the term up here at the top. IBDS. That stands for idiosyncratic brood disease syndrome. 4 big words to say we don't know what's happening, why they're dead, why they're dying. Idiosyncratic brood disease syndrome. It doesn't show up as the diseases we're familiar with. There will be bacteria developing on these dying larvae, but not bacteria that are normally pathogenic. They are bacteria that are taking advantage of a dying brood. So it's a brood disease, it's brood dying, but we don't know why, so we can give it this fancy name. So early symptoms, parasitic mite brood syndrome, PMBS. Some people are relabeling as PMS, parasitic mite syndrome, adding the B for these characteristics, the uncapping, the snot brood. Sometimes we see the recapping. And of course, we'll also see that there are low adult bee coverage and the bees moving off brood area. They shouldn't abandon brood area so easily to let us have a look at what the brood is happening here. This is really, really very spotty pattern. As soon as they remove all those cells that are uncapped, remove the pupa, this is going to be a very, very spotty pattern, immediately recognizable. They will cannibalize that brood. So there are 3, 4 arrows here. Those are pupae that had been capped. You can see the cells have been uncapped, not fully polished. You can see cappings at the edge, and the bees are removing their developing sisters. So these are worker pupae that could have been the bees that helped the colony get through the winter period. They are not, because the cells were uncapped by the mites looking for which cells had mites, the bees looking for cells which had mites in them. And once they're uncapped, then other bees come along and cannibalize. Different bees that do the uncapping, another group of these middle-aged bees. And this happens in the fall because that's that group of middle-aged bees. There's lots of them in the colony, nothing else to do. So what are they doing? They're cannibalizing brood of cells that have been uncapped. These are bees that they need to help survive the winter, that will populate that colony, should populate the colony to get through winter. So again, another characteristic of parasitic mite syndrome. So the disease inspector bee, that bee that is looking for the mites, this is from a book, Do You Speak Bees, that is just out. Al, a Utah beekeeper, has come up with these very, very interesting illustrations of bees and bee activities. And so this is one of that he's illustrated as the disease inspector bee. And these are all these activities that bees do in their colony. These bees do the work. We want them to do that hygienic behavior, but we would like to have populations that also then recap rather than just simply uncap and then cannibalize and remove the bees. One other symptom that we can look for, it's not a great one in terms of our signs, but if we see bees that have deformed wing virus symptoms or signs, humans have symptoms, bees have signs or signals. So here with Robin's illustration on the left, we've circled 3 bees, all in one colony, all with deformed wings. It kind of takes on a little bit different characteristics. This darker bee up at the top has just really wing stubs. The one lower below that, the one shown here, the wings are there. You can see they're fully formed, but they just did not expand. The one that's to the right, one wing seems to have expanded, but the other one did not. So deformed wing takes on several characteristics. This is the truth and advertising here. We've been talking about mites and parasitic mite syndrome. What is actually killing the colony, however, is not the mites. The mites are the vectors. They are the dirty hypodermic needles, as been described, for mites. These are the mites that during the developing stage of these 3 bees, these 3 deformed wing adult bees, during their developing stage, during a pupal stage, a mite punctured the exoskeleton of the developing pupae. Soon after it went to the pupal stage in the cap cell, and in so doing, enhanced the development of viruses that were in the bee's body. Bees have a whole bunch of different viruses, including this one, deformed wing virus. But with the mites opening up a puncture and then feeding on the hemolymph, this virus, there's more than one type of deformed wing virus. There's a couple at least, different names. It was enhanced, and this virus then began rampant reproduction within the body of the bee. And as a result, there was an epidemic of deformed wing virus. These 3 adults are just the tip of the iceberg. This colony is a living dead colony. If you see any number of deformed wings, virus. Bees, even one, that colony is under a great deal of stress. And you can see the spotty brood. You can see the open brood cells below it. Now, another virus that bites feeding on the pupae and also feeding on adult fat body of the adults is the paralysis virus. This dark bee on the right on the top bar here is shiny. It's black. It's pretty much hairless. It doesn't have the normal body hairs adult bees should have. And this is a bee that we would diagnose probably as chronic bee paralysis virus, or CBPV. And there are again several paralysis virus, Israeli paralysis virus, for example, acute bee paralysis viruses. The chronic is not the most serious, but the acute and the Israeli are. And again, because of the mite puncturing the bee's body, feeding on the hemolymph of the developing pupa, they are then enhancing the virus, and then the virus reaches epidemic proportion. So the truth is the colonies are actually dying or are dead by the time we find them from a virus invasion, a virus epidemic, all brought on by the bees being fed on by the mites. Now, this is also transmitted as bees feed each other, but that virus doesn't get a chance to get to epidemic proportions because when a bee feeds on another bee that has virus, the food goes into its midgut. And bees do have a bit of an immune system in their midgut, and that can help neutralize the virus particles if there's not a huge number. So it is really the mites puncturing the bee bodies with those, what was called the dirty hypodermic needles. In other words, infecting bees, bypassing the bee's immune system. And that's why a virus reaches epidemic proportions, and that's what's end up killing our colonies. Take a look here. What in the world is going on? Here's a whole bunch of adults that failed to emerge. Pupae that reached the adult stage in the cells, but then did not emerge. What in the world is going on here? This is kind of a bit of an unusual situation. So one of our treatments might be to use a miticide. So this is the effect of a miticide. Normally, we will see if we put apivar strips, the amitraz strips, in our bee colonies, the bees underneath those strips will be killed and the bees will cannibalize it. So we might see that. This is actually, in this case, a beekeeper used HopGuard as their treatment. And this is where the HopGuard strip came over the top of the frame, and we could see the dead bees that failed to come out as adults. And sometimes when we actually look at a frame, you'll see a ghost patch, particularly if you used apivar. And that's the bees that were cannibalized underneath the apivar strips in their colony. In this case, it was HopGuard. So, recap. Spring, dead or still dying colony, or in the fall, both of those colonies that we looked at with the task force that I started this discussion. Few adults, no real number of dead bees, as if the colony just was abandoned. There's just no bees around, not outside dead, not on the bottom board, really no bees on a cluster if it was a fall dead out, or a pretty weak cluster if it was a spring dead out. Scattered, leftover, sunken, perforated, capped brood. You can see that with this particular frame. And again, often more to the outside of the brood area initially because that brood just didn't have a chance to come out and join the adults in the fall colony. So they should have been enclosed as adults in September or October, but they died because of not enough bees to take care of them from too few adult bees. The chewed down pupae. You can see cells that have been opened, contents chewed down. So effective cannibalization. And why this is happening is that as the bees form their cluster, there's not enough honey in there. And so bees are cannibalizing their brood, trying to get anything, something to eat, to try to survive a few more days. Adults that are halfway out, adults that weren't able to emerge, heads out, heads and thoraxes out, but not bees all the way out. One of the things that you should do is with a dead out is make sure what's there, the dead that's there, are removable. So a toothpick or tweezers or forceps, go in, pull out some of them. If they come out, that's a very strong indicator that it is not American foul brood. And look at the color of what comes out. If it's grayish, it could be the snot brood, just dying, decaying. You don't want to see yellowish. That would be an indication of EFB, and we'll start seeing that in our counties now anytime in spring. And you don't want to see the remains being roping out or gooey, not coming out at all. That would be our indication of American foul brood. So before we jump immediately to PMS, try to eliminate American foul brood as perhaps the reason why this county did not get through the winter itself. I mentioned these secondary characteristics again. People will say, well, my counties died because of yellow jacket predation, or I had mice move in my county and they ended up killing my county. Yes, those are indications, but they're indications of something else that is going on. Skunks will reduce the strength of counties. Yellow jackets may as well, particularly when we open up those counties, but not really the reason why the county died. Absconding, certainly a reason. Bees just leave. Pesticides, if you are in an area where there's agriculture and they have been repeatedly exposed to a variety of pesticides, some of our counties will turn up as queenless in the spring, and we'll often make a diagnosis of queenlessness. But again, it is only secondary. Something else has happened with that county, most likely mites. And of course, we do lose some counties because the cover blew off. The counties were exposed. They weren't able to keep heat in and keep that sink in, and they went through their winter stores much too fast because they were exposed, et cetera, et cetera. So there are other factors, but again, many of these relate to the weaker counties, not the strong counties. So dead outs, it's mostly all about the mites, our parasitic mite syndrome. We can use that as our diagnostic key. Now, finally, for our survivors, and I hope you do have some survivors, let me know how you did in overwintering and what you did for your management. Beekeeping is all about population management. We manage two populations as shown here. The blue shows roughly what happens to a honeybee population. Where the arrow is from the colonies is roughly where we are right now towards the end of March. Our colony has gone through at least one generation so far because we had a mild February, but there's still that imbalance. There's not enough cleaning bees, not enough nurse age bees, but that will quickly improve. And then that colony will very quickly become at a stage where the good times roll, okay? A couple of good generations, in other words, 21-day generations, queen laying lots of eggs, getting back to that balance, and then all of a sudden where they rear their brood gets very congested, lots of bodies, nothing to do, milling around. The queen and her chemicals do not get distributed, and then the colony wants to go into its reproduction. So mama mite laying eggs is populating her family, but colony reproduction is swarming. And so that's going to occur as the population goes through a couple of good generations, starts reaching its peak. And it's all due to that congestion in the area of the brood. Older queens do not have enough queen substance to begin with, and it's all about distribution of that substance. Now, the second population we have to manage is of the mites. So that's the orange line. A few adults survived no matter what we did. If you used oxalic over the winter period, that's a good management tool. But some mites are still going to survive. They're going to start their reproduction, but there are not many of them, so their population will be at a very low point. But they will start reproducing in the drone cells. The mites can reproduce more offspring females in drones, so they'll start reproducing, and their population will grow. Now, when we've been looking at our mite treatment through the lens of our beekeeping, what we've been focused on is that period of time. That is after the supers come off, after the peak population, bees have stored their honey for the season. We can make our assessment of what is surplus, rob it from them. And now we have colonies back to the brood boxes or brood box if you run them in one or you run them in two. But that's when we've been focusing on our mite treatment. But it is too late, particularly in colonies that have generated a good deal of mites. We must refocus our attention on that mite population now. End of March, April, not too soon. Now is the time when we must do our mite control. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to flatten the mite growth curve. Just as we attempt in those counties that are beginning to swarm to flatten their growth curve, well, we've got to do that with mites now, before the mites have a chance to reproduce. So that's focusing on drone brood, that's focusing on using chemicals as soon as the weather permits, and doing our mite treatment now, not later in the year. Now, that's our next activity that we need to focus on after we've done our assessment of the brood, after we've looked at the Goldilocks effects, figure out which counties are weak, which ones are spring, then start our focus on mite and mite treatment. That's another whole talk. We shouldn't be asking of our county, do you have mites? That's not the way we should phrase the question. We need to phrase the question, how many mites does our hive have? Unfortunately, our techniques for doing that, taking a sample of adult bees and looking for the percentage of mites of adult bees, is ineffective, highly ineffective in April and May, because the mites are not on adult bee bodies in April and May. They are on drone adult bodies, and particularly in the drone brood. That's where they are. And a good resource that you should be thinking about is Tools for Varroa Management from the Honeybee Health Coalition. I wrote the original edition. We've gone through a number of revisions, so make sure you're looking at the last revision we did last fall, 2023, where we emphasize this aspect, work on drone management. You can do it. We can treat early in the spring. We have tools. We have Formic. We have thyme oil. We have Apiguard, depending on how soon you will put your supers on. And we have drone brood removal. And as we start working on swarm control, we have brood breaks. We can do it. We can help control drones. Here are a couple of new things. USDA very recent publication said that a particular type of blue-green algae helps control the spread of the virus of the DWV, the deformed wing virus. And so developing patties that have this blue-green algae can help reduce the chance that the county gets the epidemic of DWV. Something that doesn't work, and there is no silver bullet, is something that is the magic snake oil. And here's one of them. I'm only picking on one of many. This is a product called Complete. It has Nozavet, which is very ineffective for nosema disease. It has Optima. It has pro and prebiotics. And it has a lot of other things in it as well. So if you want to massage your thoughts and do nothing for your bees, buy this very expensive sugar syrup that has all these other things in it that do virtually nothing as well. A toolkit for your disease, gloves, forceps, toothpicks, capping scratcher. We should be looking among the drone brood. The mites are not randomly distributed. So if you have drone brood on 2 or 3 or 4 frames, look at drone brood, take and impale the cap brood with a capping and scratcher and just pull the drone brood right out through the cappings. If you find as many as a couple that have mites on them, now is the time. Now, spring is the time to do your mite control. Don't wait until after the supers come out. Powdered sugar, the diagnostic kits, they're a little expensive, but if you do suspect disease, there's one for A, one for E. Certainly flashlight magnifying glass. If you take a sample, put it down in a record book. If you do a sample, the only lab that's available for Washington residents is to send it off to the U.S. Department of Agriculture lab in Beltsville, Maryland. Look up their site. How do you send adult bees for mite sampling? How do you send a brood sample to if you are suspecting, oh my God, I've got a disease here. I'm not sure which one it is. The kit is too expensive. You can send a sample off to the bee lab, and within 2 or 3 week period of time, you will get it back. But make sure you mark the county so that you could do your remediation when you get your results back. Finally, if you want some information about bees, I do sell some of the books that I have authored. Here are the 3 more recent ones. Honeybee Biology. The middle one is our field guide, great illustrations book to bring into the field. And for the rest of the family to kind of understand what in the world you're doing with those bees and why we keep bees and basic information on bees and starting with bees, the complete bee handbook. I'd be glad to send you a copy through the mail, minimal mailing charge. My email is there. So that was our commercial at the end. See, I have one more slide that says questions. You can use either of my emails. I use my emeritus one from the University of Delaware or from Oregon State. I use Karen D at oregonstate.edu. That is my last slide. I'm not sure who's going to come on. Dawn is unmuted.
Yeah, I'm here. I have a question for you, Dewey. So you mentioned the blue-green algae. Is that what is in, oh gosh, Hive Alive? Is that do you know?
No, that's not what's in Hive Alive. It's something that's new, just has come from the USDA lab. The same fellow that's doing the looking and seeing that we're having the beginning of amatraz resistance, Frank Regilio, it's coming from their lab. So if you use your search engine and look for blue-green algae as a feed for honeybees, something like that. I don't believe yet there is anything on the market, but it will come. There'll be something soon, I'm sure. By the way, as well, in the discussion of oxalic acid extended, there will be, I guess I said that at the beginning, there will be varoxasan, which will be on the market. So pretty soon it will be a legal treatment to use oxalic acid extended. You won't have to figure out how to dissolve glycerin and oxalic and glycerin and endanger yourself and coming up with that home remedy.
But I think it will only be legal when purchased, still not legal to homebrew, right?
It's the homebrew will not be legal, and states, Washington State will have to approve it, and so that would not be your people at Washington State. That's going to be the pesticide regulatory people there in Olympia.
Good. So
I
is
have a
there
question.
good, Kathy? Yep.
Kathy.
Okay, the bees that are hairless and very dark and shiny, you know, it's hard to tell at the end of a bee's life because most of the bees are looking like that. They've worn off all their hair. How do you differentiate?
It is very difficult. These are bees that are struggling. They have trouble walking on all 6 legs. They're stumbling as well. These are the bees you'll find out front on colonies. If you are an area where there's grass, they try to climb up a piece of grass, try to take off and dive bomb immediately back. So it's more than just the color and the shiny. There really are bees that can't motor well.
Got it. Thank you, Dewey.
I should have said that, Kathy. I'm glad you asked that question. Thank
No,
you.
it's great. And I have your phone.
Very good. If you'd
I
like
haven't
to
gotten
newer
through it
edition,
all, but I use it like a, looking up stuff all the time.
it is expensive, but like Kathy, you will use it as a resource.
Yeah.
You'll
And
get
I was
your money's
lucky
worth.
someone gifted it to me, so I was very lucky.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Very good. I will be at some meetings coming up in a couple of weeks. I'll do the Olympia and the Northwest and the Skagit and Stanwood Camino meetings. I will be at the fall meeting. I just did also ask a beekeeper from the Washington State group. Some of you were on that, so I apologize that you saw some of the same slides.
Do you have a listing of where you'll be? What groups you'll be speaking to?
So yeah, I do. I'll be glad to send it. It's beginning April 8th, Monday, Olympia, Tuesday, Northwest, 9th, 10th will be the Stanwood, Camino Island, and then the Thursday, the 11th, and then I collapse. Thursday, 11th will be all the way up at Skagit. Then I get to travel back home. Actually, I'm going to Kim's Flatum's Tribune, so I fly out of SeaTac on a Friday morning.
And for those of you who don't know about the Ask a Washington Beekeeper, that is a Facebook group that was developed by the WASBA, Washington Beekeeper Association, and they are trying to reach more remote beekeepers who don't have access to clubs like we do. And so every month they have a live speaker come on and they record those topics. And I think I was their first speaker on there, but I'm doing the same thing that we're doing next month. But if it's still recorded there. So if you go to Ask a Washington Beekeeper on Facebook, over time, they're accumulating a really good assortment of topics that you'll be able to scroll back through and watch. And it's better than going to YouTube. They're really high quality topics.
I think I was the fourth one, so I think they put the fourth one up. By the way, your meeting next month, I would highly recommend you tune in and hear Dawn. That's a fascinating study that she's done with fat body. So nice talk. I enjoy it myself.
Oh, good, good. And so next month, I forgot to mention, we are at the Center for Urban Horticulture. So for those of you who come live to the meeting, we are not at the Arboretum. We are at a different location nearby. It's kind of behind the tennis courts or behind the stadium there. The address will be on the newsletter.
So we have questions here too. Just a moment, we're getting closer to the mic. Go ahead.
Yes,
Okay,
I have
Brian.
one question. You spoke about the population imbalance at the beginning of the year, about having a lot of older bees, and then as they age out, then there are a lot more house bees and less foragers. Is there a way to kind of shift some of the needs, or does feeding the colonies internally help at all with that, or are foragers still the ones doing the work even if it's inside?
So feeding does help a lot, yes, and balancing the colonies by weakening the strong and helping to boost up the weaker ones does help a lot. It helps the colonies, all the colonies get back into that balance faster. That's the biology is going on. Unfortunately, if we just look at it, it's hard to tell really what is going on. Look at the brood, particularly that young brood. What does their brood food look like? That's one indicator. And the other is if you have your colony so that you can see the dead bees that are being thrown out nightly, that will now be pretty heavy, but that will then become reduced, and that's another sort of way to tell as well. Bees need pollen right now. They don't need nectar. So that's what we hope we have.
Yay.
Another county from inside, another question from inside?
In the room.
Well,
Yeah, we
thank
have one question here, just a sec.
Good.
Okay, give me 1 second. I have to let my nephew in, just a second. Finished? Right there, almost finished.
It's such a treat having Dewey here, you guys. He's just a
Oh,
one.
yeah.
He's an icon in the bee industry. So this is really a treat.
Question from the
Yeah.
group there?
Yeah, I was wondering, you had mentioned that when the mites are biting the pupa, that it's exacerbating the virus, the DWV, that's already in the bee, or is it the mite that's a vector carrying the virus itself?
Initially, it's the mite carrying the virus. So when it puts its mouth parts into the bee, it transmits the virus into the bee, bypassing its midgut. Then what happens when that bee is dying and the adult bees cannibalize, so they're chewing up that body. The mites that have been feeding on that, the mite, because it has enhanced the DWV, it's growing in that body. So then when the bees clean out the dead body, the adult bees are also picking up virus. And that's the virus that they will spread to their sisters when they feed them through the trophallaxis, through their mutual feeding. So the virus can be either way, but directly from the mite into the bee's body, or as they clean up that dead and dying bee body from one bee to another bee. They're really insidious, really, a double whammy there.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Dewey, for coming. This has just been absolutely a joy. I think we all
Fantastic, yeah.
and the people in the comments are saying thank you, and this has just been absolutely lovely. And
Oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. I enjoyed it. Hope to see you at a meeting, maybe the first week of April, or at the state meeting in October. It'll be in Olympia.
And we're going to send the link out for the survey in the newsletter. So if you didn't catch the link early on, then we'll have everyone see that on the newsletter and take the survey and add to the research.
Thank you. And thank you. What I do is I'll generate a individual club report of what just your club members sent in and compare it to Washington State overall.
Oh, that's cool. That would be exciting.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
and that'll be on the same
grow it enough.
site. So there's a site, Take the Survey, and there's
Yeah.
another site of survey results. So when I get that done, it will be on the same pnwhoneybeesurvey.com. And thank you. Thank you for posting that.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Dewey. Thank you,
All
everyone.
righty. Good
Happy
evening,
spring.
all. Happy
Good-
spring. It's going to come, believe it or not. It will.
Good night,
Very good.
everybody. That was just great. I'm so glad that we were able to have Dewey. We're just so rich with these wonderful people that will come and speak to us. And, make sure that if you didn't get everything tonight, that you go and see the recording of it, because it's there for you another time. Or if you have a friend that didn't make it to the meeting, like I do, Kevin, I'm going to remind them to go check it out, because there's a lot of information. I learned some new stuff, and after 25 years, it's really fun to learn new stuff. So thanks again, Dewey. Good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Kathy. Yeah. Good night, all.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.